I need some traction. You need some traction.
Joining me today, Nadya Khoja, all the way from Toronto. She will be covering how you can grow by content. She has a pretty unique story as a digital marketer, as she was hired at Venngage, and she's supposed to receive a digital marketing training. And over the course of 4 years, she's still wondering where is the training. But she became a chief growth officer, and the company is growing 10x. Content is the big unicorn channel for the growth, and today she will share with us how she did it.
Thanks, Vasil. Hey everyone, my name is Nadya Khoja, and as Vasil mentioned, I'm now the Chief Growth Officer at Venngage. So today I want to talk to you guys about a strategy that we used at Venngage to scale up our organic blog traffic specifically. Throughout the presentation, if you have any questions, feel free to tweet at me or just type into that chat box. And I'm happy to check my Twitter afterwards. Or if you just want to heckle me on Twitter, that's fine too. So before we get started, I want to tell you a little bit about Venngage and kind of how I joined. So I joined back in 2015. And I was actually the fourth person at the company and the first marketer on the team. And at that time, we were generating roughly 400 leads or 400 signups to our tool a week. So we're a freemium version infographic maker, which wasn't bad, right? Like I came in there was still some growth happening. I think we were doing about 200K MRR or ARR, something like that. And so zoom into today, and that number is actually a little bit higher than 80,000. It's about 120,000 signups a week is what we're doing now. And the thing is, our strategy hasn't really changed that much. We still focus primarily on content and creating content and using that to drive organic traffic, specifically from Google. And we hardly spend any money on ads. In fact, we've only really started to ramp up our ad spend with SEM in the past year or so. And for the most part, it's just doubling down on content we already know works because of SEO. And we've managed to achieve growth quite rapidly. In fact, we're growing at an average rate of about 150% year over year without any series funding. If we're looking at the number of leads and the number of registrations that we're actually getting to our product. So our traffic continues to scale up year over year like that. But what's important to note is that more than 10% of those leads that we're getting, so those registrations to our freemium tool, are actually coming directly from our blog. And the direct conversion rate on our blog is about 5% from visit to registration. So if you're familiar with content and consuming content, you'll probably know that the conversion rate to actually register is usually not that high. And of course, this wasn't always the case for us either, right? It was a lot lower, but we started incrementally testing different ways to actually increase those conversions and better target the type of content we were creating. So initially we were getting like tons of traffic, but not that many people were actually taking any action. And we weren't getting the right type of people into the top of the funnel. So we've continued to pivot what we're doing. And it was actually towards the end of about 2017 where we fully revised our strategy. And by revising the strategy, I don't mean changing the type of content or changing our approach of content first strategy. It was more about figuring out what types of content to place in different parts of the funnel. And we did that, and by doing that, we managed to achieve, a lot more consistent and predictable growth moving forward. Now, for whatever reason, I've noticed that a lot of people that I talk to are pretty opposed to trying content marketing, or at least they were pre everyone being remote and at home. And I used to hear a lot of excuses from people as to why they chose not to double down on it. Things like, it doesn't convert, or it takes too long to see results, or it isn't scalable, and then the list went on. And so instead, what a lot of these marketers ended up relying on was pouring a lot of money into ads because, it's faster and it's easier. But what happens when you don't really have an initial budget for advertising, right? Like if anyone's familiar with Facebook advertising, SEM, it's pretty costly. And if you're not really good at understanding that attribution funnel, it can become a little bit more difficult to really see if you're actually generating return. Or what happens if your LTV isn't high enough to sustain them? What if you are predominantly a freemium product and you can't actually spend that much upfront to get leads into the top of the funnel? So today, I want to share the exact framework that we used at Venngage to prove that content marketer is actually a very effective and scalable means of growth. And you just need to approach it the right way and think more like a growth marketer. And the framework we only started applying to our blog strategy, like I mentioned at the end of 2017, is actually what helped lead us to 3xing our blog traffic in less than a year. So how many of you guys have actually decided to attempt, scaling up content marketing as an acquisition channel, or have seen success in it in the past? Can I see the chat box here? Yeah, I can. Okay. Yeah, so let me know if you guys have actually used it in the past and have seen any benefit from it. But typically, the way I've seen it work is somebody will start by, writing an article, and then, you publish it and then you wait, right? Does anyone kind of relate to this? Chances are you don't really see much improvement. So you're like, hey, I've got this really great idea. What if I do the same thing again? And so you write another article and then you publish and then you wait. And unfortunately, this process of insanity never really seems to repair itself. And you're just stuck in this weird loop. And what happens is, maybe your organic growth looks something like this. For those of you who can't understand sarcasm, that was sarcasm because there's no growth here. It's just flat. Or, maybe something like this, you get like a few random spikes here and there, but ultimately you're just kind of coasting on this like flat sea of nothingness. Or maybe, you've had some luck with promoting content, but it's still ultimately nothing to brag about, right? Maybe you get like a little wave that you can ride on for a bit, but then ultimately it flattens out or it just is unpredictable spikes here and there. And so I love looking at people's charts like this on Ahrefs of their organic growth, especially when they claim to be content experts or content marketing experts, because a lot of the people that are preaching using content for acquisition are claiming to be experts, and unfortunately, none of them can actually practice what they're preaching. And so ultimately, this is the results that you're going to see if those are the experts that you're relying on. So today I'm going to cover 4 important aspects for preparing your content strategy in order to achieve actual scalable growth, so that hopefully by the end of the session, your traffic looks a little bit less like this and a little bit more like this. And yes, that is me skiing down the slopes of content success. So the 4 things I'm going to cover today are goals, research, authority, and promotion. And these are ultimately the main building blocks, I think, that a growth marketer or growth content marketer should take into account when trying to scale up your organic traffic. In other words, it spells out GRAP. It's like grape without the E. And yes, I'm familiar that I could have probably included one more step like engagement or something else for that E, but I gave up after the P, so there you go. So the first part of the framework that we're gonna jump into is the G, which is the goals part of the framework. Now for goals, obviously to me, it made the most sense to show you what looks like a one-legged stick man who's been shot down, to describe what the goal of winning at Google looks like. And so if we start over here, I know it's a little bit blurry, but I'll walk you through it. So if we start over here, this is the head, which is to win at Google. And if we break it down, we ultimately end up focusing on the stickman's 2 arms and leg. And that brings us to what the main goals are for, content in general or organic traffic. And in this case, winning at Google, which is ultimately higher domain authority, higher conversions, and more traffic, right? If we have to break it down into a nutshell, those are the things we're ultimately doing in order to win at Google. And ultimately, we want at least one of those 3 things, and the majority of us want all of those things because we are greedy capitalists. However, not all content can achieve all of those things at the same time. And unfortunately, that's what a lot of us think is possible, right? We try to find that magic piece of content that's going to get us, that higher domain authority, higher conversions, more traffic, and we pitch this to our teams and we're like, this is like the silver bullet that's going to win. And like most of our dreams, unfortunately, that does not come to fruition. And maybe what this really means is that we need to stop relying on the same process for content creation in hopes of achieving various different goals, right? We won't take the same processes or take the same steps in order to achieve various goals in our own lives. Why would we apply that same principle to content? So really, we need to create specific types of content that target each one of these goals individually. So for instance, you might have, a product or service that falls into a relatively niche industry, right? I remember I spoke to somebody who was selling extension cords, and they're like, how do I make extension cords sexy? And I was like, dude, I have 100 ways to make extension cords sexy, but I'm not going to go into those right now. So the point is, maybe you have this product that falls into a relatively niche industry, and maybe you're really good at creating content that's optimized for conversions, right? Generally like that bottom of the funnel content, or maybe it's easier to do that. But that content's probably not going to be the same thing that's going to get you tons of traffic because of how niche your product is, right? So the content in question is really only achieving that one goal, which is ultimately bottom of the funnel goal, not top of the funnel. So here's an overview of how Venngage approaches some of our content goals. And this is pretty specific to Venngage, but the framework will still apply to any of your other strategies or any of your other niches that you're focusing on. So for us, our goal to hit viral or higher domain authority, for instance, comes down to viral or editorial content. So this is what we refer to it in-house. And our viral and editorial content, the purpose is specifically to get press links, right? Or high quality links, because for those of you who are not familiar with Google, generally higher quality or higher authority websites that are pointing back to your site will, in the eyes of Google, seem more authoritative. And as a result, that authority will slowly transfer into your own site. So we create content with the purpose of getting this authority. Because if you have a higher domain authority, I know it's been implied that it's not a real thing, but I think it's still a real thing. Don't quote me on that. But if you have like a higher authority site or a higher brand authority site that people want to talk about or share, chances are the rest of your content will slowly build authority within that realm and start to rank naturally a little bit higher. And then we have another thing for higher conversions, which is what we call actionable or how-to content. And logically, what that means is this is content for our audience to help them actually walk through specific steps in order to solve the customer pain point or educate users and really get them to that point of activation and conversion. And then finally, we have our more traffic content, which is really what we call inspirational content, but it's pretty long form content that is intended to rank on various high volume keywords as well as long tail keywords. So rather than trying to pick one keyword that's like 40,000 searches a month, we'll actually look at 10,000 keywords that have 10 searches a month and try to get them to rank on a lot of long tail keywords. I need to take a break. Hold on, let me drink some coffee. Catch up with some of these chats. All I see is that I'm amazing, and I'm just going to ignore anything that's not about how amazing I am. All right, so let's keep going. Now, at a closer glance, creating content to boost your domain authority might look something like this, right? So in a nutshell, like I said, you need these high quality, high press links from notable sites. So let's just assume like Mashable, Forbes, Entrepreneur, pointing back to your domain. But they probably don't want to write about your article on simple backgrounds and design tips, or mine for that matter. So you need to think of something a little bit more appealing, something like this other article that we wrote on, visual marketing statistics, which is actually a survey that we ran, and it's what we would deem as original content. And a site that's a little bit more business focused might be more interested in writing about new research that's being done because it's more relevant to them, rather than me just giving you a bunch of tips on design. It's just not relevant. It's not newsworthy enough for them. And when we take a closer look, of course, that article that gets you all those press links might not actually be optimized in a way that's going to get a lot of organic traffic. So again, this kind of, busts that thought process that, a lot of links means a lot of traffic. That's not at all how it works. So if we take a closer look, you can see that this visual content marketing statistics article has a really high URL authority, a lot of backlinks, and a lot of referring domains. But the organic traffic coming from it is not great, right? Only 18 sessions a month. Whereas the other article that I have over here, the simple backgrounds post, this one has only 8 backlinks and 6 different domains referring to it. But look, it's driving almost 13,000 sessions a month. So what works to get links will not always be the same thing that works to get you traffic. See what I'm getting at? If you're interested in learning a little bit more about how to create viral content. I don't have enough time to go through it there, but I created this video when I was drunk. So you can watch that, and the reviews have either been, this is useless and it makes no sense, or if you're relatively junior in marketing, it might be valuable. But you can take a look and come to your own conclusions. So anyway, even like I said, a lot of traffic and a lot of links don't always correlate. So your content calendar really isn't just about, this list of fun ideas to write about anymore. And rather it needs to be strategic, and it needs to take into account, each one of these goals individually. So even if, user acquisition is this thing at the top of the funnel, you kind of need to approach it like its own funnel or landscape. We talked about the 3 types of goals to strive for with your content. But the next part of the framework is research. So this means developing a system to actually identify which keywords to rank for. Now, it doesn't make sense to me to approach content marketing without taking keyword research into account. And a lot of marketers spend, a lot of time and money producing and creating all this content for acquisition, but getting little to no results because there's no strategy, right? So they're flatlining. Use research or use keyword research to guide the interest and the need for the piece of content, but don't solely rely on keyword research. And really, the creation process should start with the keyword research. Some content marketers will disagree and say, go after your audience's needs and the jobs to be done, which I also agree with. But if no one is searching for any of the terms that you're including in your content, they're not going to find it, right? So anyway, you should start with that and actually use that as a guideline. So the way I see it, with SEO content strategy, there's typically 2 types of pages that you're working with promoting, and that's it. And to simplify things for you, those are your boring pages and your not boring pages. So your boring pages are essentially these high converting landing pages, right? And the reason that I refer to them as boring pages is because they're super hard to build links to, because they're boring. There's nothing in there that's insightful. There's nothing that makes me want to link to it. And then you have your not boring pages, which are like these fun, ungated pieces of content. You might have like cool quizzes. You might have some interesting data in there. You might have a cool infographic or some visuals. But the point is they're not boring, so most people are more inclined to link to them and actually promote them for you. So when figuring out which keywords to target, so again, I know this is a little bit blurry, but I like to create what I call a content organization system. This is an overview of what a really simple organization system would look like for my personal blog. So the purpose of this system is to just brainstorm keywords, right? We're not coming up with new content just yet. And essentially give you a better idea of the range and diversity of content that you can write about as it pertains to people's interests. So we're starting with interests and we're using that to guide keywords. So that way, like I said, you're not playing these guessing games. You're not wasting your time writing anything and everything. And you're actually writing content that people are actually searching for. And then you use this to come up with new ideas. So let's say, I have 2 major categories. So on your blog, you probably have a few different categories on your site for leadership, for marketing, etc. So for me, I have these 2 major categories. The first one is leadership. So then using, common sense, I'm going to break down what does leadership mean, or what are some other subcategories of leadership? Well, I might talk about management. I might talk about company culture, personal development, and productivity. And same thing, I'll do that with marketing. However, if I were to go to Google Keyword Planner and just type in leadership, that's not going to show me all of these different ideas, right? They're just going to show me various keywords that include the term leadership in it. So I have to start to think about, what are people actually looking for when they're thinking about leadership? So this will give me an idea of subcategories that I can dive deeper in. So then, because your organization system, it looks like some people are freezing or refreshing. I'll pause for a second until more people seem to be doing okay. All right, I need to take a sip of coffee anyway, so this is good timing, guys. Okay, so your content organization system is broken down into these categories, these subcategories, and these long tail terms. So for instance, like I said, we have our general term, but if I took management as one of my subcategories, and then I started breaking that down and looking, at Google keyword ideas to see what other types of words people use more specifically with the word management, I might come across these like subcategories of keywords. So I might have business management or management skills or people management. And these are things that people are actually searching for that I can use to guide my content. And then I'm going to do that again, and I'm going to keep breaking that down until I get, okay, well, what does management skills give me? So then I get good management skills or team management skills. And when we look at it, if I go back to that previous slide, the search volume for something like leadership is pretty high, but the competition is going to be pretty high, right? Like a new website like mine is not going to rank for leadership in a day, but I could potentially publish one article and rank for some of these keywords that are a little bit more long tail, but a lot more focused in what I'm writing about. So eventually, the purpose of doing something like this is so that I can hopefully chart something like this out, which gives me a better understanding of, the theme and the depth of the topics that I'm trying to write about. So if leadership is this, this big bubble that I'm trying to create content for, and I understand the subcategories of leadership, eventually I can start grouping little and smaller, bubbles of content together to create more focused ideas that I can then actually target online for the right audience, right? So now you see how we're tying back this idea of job to be done thinking back into actual keyword research to create the content that our audience wants. And it's already validated before we've even had to write anything. And this brings me to the next stage, which is authority, right? Because ultimately what we're doing here by creating these clusters or these, pillar content, these content clusters, is establishing authority on Google, but also within our brand and within our audience. And if you want to be able to really maximize the way that you're driving traffic to your site, it's important to work ultimately on focusing back to this authority or this content authority. And eventually, you become more well-known as a brand and by search engines for those topics. So for instance, at Venngage, we started producing a lot of content about infographics. And as a result now, if we publish something on the topic of infographics, we typically start to rank higher right away, or we get seen by Google pretty quickly. And it works out well. Now, if I started to publish content on Venngage all of a sudden about, medical health, we're probably not going to rank very quickly because we're not authoritative in that realm, right? The robots are good at figuring out how everything connects together. So where am I going now? So yeah, this is where your content organization system comes in handy, right? Because now that we've gotten all this research together and we know what some of these keywords are, what some of these authority bubbles are, now we can start to go back to that initial question of what is our goal and figure out what types of content will actually hit different goals to tie back into our authority building. If you're following what I'm saying. So for instance, we talked about actionable content, we talked about viral content, we talked about inspirational content. We can use this sheet to start figuring out what some of those pages or titles might look like and start brainstorming different types of ideas. And eventually, what we'll hopefully do is build out, another interrelated web of topics that we can use to build into our bubbles or build our bubbles on and create content that's, again, more authoritative within these different types of realms that we're trying to rank for. And eventually, if you're following what I'm saying, if I have this pillar term of leadership, which is ultimately what I want to build my authority in, I might have a pillar page on what is leadership or what is management, or start on like some of these lower tier clusters, right? But ultimately, I'm creating a piece of viral content, maybe something like, what leadership skills CEOs of Fortune 500 companies all possess. And it might be like a cool data viz and survey of that. And that might be my viral piece that I pitch to, Entrepreneur, Forbes, etc. Oops. And then I might have my actionable how-to content, which is, specific steps on how to be a good leader. And this is what, I might use to convert somebody to sign up for consulting lessons with me, or like take on a course or whatever that might be. And then I might have my inspirational piece of content, which is like, 50 inspirational leadership quotes from all these different leaders. And I might leverage, Tony Robbins' name, Jeff Bezos' name, and use them to actually drive more traffic and referral traffic back to my site. So ultimately, I'm using my content to help support this authoritative web that I'm trying to build. Actually, the final part of the framework, which is the promotion part, right? So the unfortunate truth is more people spend time creating content and not enough time promoting it. But once you've created content with a specific goal and you've done all this keyword research and you've built it into this authoritative bubble, the next step is really getting it in front of the right people. So if we take a look back at one of our, content marketing experts from before, and I actually zoomed into some of the top 10 pages that they have on their site to see which pages are actually driving considerable traffic. And the first few are okay, but you can see that it fizzles off pretty quickly by the time we get to page 10. And then when I looked deeper into it, I noticed that they actually have over 5,000 different blog posts published. And they continue to publish content on a daily basis. However, it doesn't seem to be creating much of an impact. So then I looked at their social just to see, maybe they're driving traffic from somewhere else. And not really, right? So like a lot of this content was going unseen entirely. But what's more surprising is that only less than 500 of those pages were actually driving any traffic at all. So this is like looking at sites like SimilarWeb or any other, tracking sites. Most of the traffic was coming from 500 pages. So I'm like, what is the other, 90% of content on their site actually doing? Well, it's not doing anything. So it seems like a waste, right? Because if you're spending time creating all of this, you're doing all this research, why bother just publishing it if you're not actually going to promote it and do the work for it? For instance, at Venngage, we have now, I think, close to 800,000 sessions just from our blog alone, and we have maybe 250 blog posts. And we're managing to do that by just updating and reiterating different types of content. So you don't need a lot of pages. You can literally have one page ranking for 10,000 different keywords. So rule of thumb that our team often sticks to is that promotion is more important than creation and should take up more time than creation. Now, of course, depending on the type of content you are promoting, the goal and the process for promoting it will be different depending on the goal, right? If the goal is higher domain authority, obviously you want to get a little bit more narrow with who you're pitching. Your pitching is going to be a little bit different, and so on and so forth. And it's the same for if you're doing something for higher conversion or more traffic geared content, right? The process and the steps that you take are going to be a little bit different because there are certain sites that you might be able to get away with pitching for the more traffic geared posts where they're a little bit more similar niches and topics. You might get more better placed links, that kind of thing. Because in a nutshell, as marketers focusing on search traffic and organic traffic, we're all just searching for these precious little backlinks, right? So ultimately, there's two tools that I predominantly use. I'm not affiliated with these companies. These are just tools that we've been using, and Mailshake is pretty cheap and gets the job done. So I'll walk you through quickly some of the steps that I might use for Ahrefs, for instance. So Ahrefs has, for those of you who don't know, it's an SEO tool. And they have this function called the Content Explorer tool. And this is one of many ways you can use Ahrefs to do any type of link building or SEO research. But assume we have an article written on the topic of infographic design, right? So I might go to their Content Explorer tool and I'll type in infographic design. And I just want to see what other types of sites have written about infographic design or have used that word at some point in their content. And then you can filter by domain rating. Again, we're not totally sure if that's worth doing, but you can do it. And so you can see that you're making sure that you're not generating low quality links in your research. So then, of course, there's this other function where you can see if it's just in the content or in the title. And what I like to do is typically with this type of link building research is filtering out anything that's in the title. Because if I'm trying to rank for a term like infographic design, chances are somebody else who's ranking for infographic design or targeting that keyword isn't going to want to link to my article on the same topic that they've already talked about. So I'm looking at people who have actually just mentioned the term in the content, but their article seems to not even be about that topic at all. So this example of a visual compendium of glowing creatures is the perfect example. So I can go and reach out and say, hey, that's an awesome visual compendium of glowing creatures. I see that you say infographic design inside your content. Would you like to link to my guide? And this is an example of how you might actually approach some content-based link building research. So once you've done some of your research, then you can, scrape that list, plug it into Mailshake, and start doing some cold pitching. So I think Mailshake's actually a sales tool, like a sales outreach tool, but it works pretty well for email outreach in general, especially if you're doing link building. So it's nice because you can actually track their open rates, the click-through rates, and anything like that. So it helps you get better at your emails. I like it because you can set up a lot of personalized outreach. So I just want to go into some best practices quickly before we wrap up for outreach in general. So my first rule of thumb is, don't sound like a robot. And it's pretty easy to do that now because most people doing outreach are actually bots. So don't sound like a robot and risk, getting moved to the spam box. So this is an example of a message that we got on LinkedIn. So this was going to my head of content, Sarah, and she got this message, and it's not a bad message, right? The first red flag was they said, "I came across your PM plan article, just stunning. There's no way I won't fall in love with that." Pretty sure it's a project management plan article. Little bit over enthusiastic for the subject matter. But the funny thing was this person actually sent the exact same message to several people on my marketing team to me that says that, they just went to LinkedIn. They were like marketers at Venngage and then sent the same message to everybody. So make sure that you're actually paying attention to who you're messaging, which brings me to my next point, which is culling your lists and making sure that the content you're referencing in your pitch is actually relevant to the link that you want. We get a lot of people that accidentally pitch us, which are a competitor. So then we just know what they're doing and then we can beat them at their own game. Or we get people pitching us totally irrelevant content. So they'll see that we're an infographic tool. They'll pitch us an infographic on dental hygiene. And I'm like, this is not relevant to our audience. We're not going to publish this. So just make sure you're culling your list and you're not just targeting the keyword. You're actually doing some research on who they are. My next best practice is, don't be afraid to inject your personality in your email. My rule of thumb is you should be yourself. That is, unless yourself sucks, then you can be someone better. So this is an example. If you haven't noticed so far, I have a pretty self-deprecating, sarcastic sense of humor. So I decided to use that in my email follow-ups. This was actually the third in a sequence of 3 follow-ups that I think I had. And by this point, of course, I hadn't heard back from anybody. So the email just says, "Yep, it's me again. Before you delete this, can you still think about linking to this guide that I sent you? Again, if you don't want to or can't for whatever reason, that's totally fine. Just let me know so I don't follow up again." And you can even just reply no. And then I say, other forms of rejection I've received in the past include "please go away" or "I don't like you" or "unsubscribe," all caps, "not interested," and F you, the most common of all. So by all means, feel free to take your pick from the above or, offer me something new and I can add it to my list of rejections and talk to you soon or not. And what's interesting is this email actually got me a 50% increase in responses and follow through, maybe because they just felt bad for me. So either way, it worked. And as growth marketers, what we're really focusing on is the data. And lastly, and most importantly of all, give them a reason to care about what you're doing, because ultimately we are hopefully all people except for some of the bots that are doing their outreach. So the more they care, the better your chances of getting that link, right? Which means short and sweet doesn't always work. Sometimes longer emails where you share a little bit of your story and you've actually shown that you've done some research can help establish the connection and the relationship with person. And if you can make it personal enough, you might actually make a friend out of it, especially now that we're all stuck at home anyway. Because the main thing to think about with SEO, with marketing in general, really, is that we're all trying to build a relationship with our users, with our clients, with our team, right? So it's not always about this quick win strategy. Sometimes it's a long-term strategy that will eventually give you more wins down the line. So if you can reap better rewards in the future, if you invest a little bit of time and effort now, that's always something to keep in mind of. Because many marketers don't think content marketing is the same as growth marketing, but all growth marketing really is this data-driven and iterative approach to growth. So the goal is to get big results with calculated risks. And I think if you follow the same logic with your content, you guys should be able to get the same type of results and not flatline. And there's the list of results and a recap.
Excellent. Right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, and we're looking forward to seeing you at the future events.
Thanks. Take care, guys.
I need some traction.